the single only person in American history and the world who's ever indicted a president, the man you might recall who brought 2 criminal indictments against then-defendant Trump. I am talking about someone we almost never hear from before, during, and after those cases. Former DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith, the only federal prosecutor to indict a president. He just doesn't speak much. You might recall that if you remember those busy periods during his 2 cases over the past years. But he has now, the news tonight, made this rare public appearance. And it's with someone you might recognize, a fellow Justice Department veteran, Andrew Weissmann, who also, we should note, is an MSNBC analyst. So this is big news, full disclosure, someone we work with. But when this hit, I don't care who he happened to be talking to, it was going to be a big deal because it was his first comments since all of this happened, and the person he once prosecuted as a federal defendant, Donald Trump, has become president again. Smith, who speaks in a very businesslike and dry way, you can prepare for that because I'm going to show you this. He is not jumping around and being dramatic. He's not speaking in sound bites, to be sure. And yet, in a way, he was still quite candid about what was his long, secret, discreet work as a special counsel prosecuting a former president who was also a candidate. And he discusses, based on the evidence and facts, he says, what is wrong with the Trump-Bondi DOJ today.
Once we get in a position where we start talking about maybe not following court opinions we don't like, we are lost. The attacks on public servants, it has a cost for our country that is incalculable. The idea that politics played a role in who worked on that case or who got chosen is ludicrous. Everybody who worked on my team was fired. Apolitical people who wanted to do the right thing and do public service. They brought somebody in who had never been a criminal prosecutor. That just reeks of lack of process. Process shouldn't be a political issue. People have to think about what matters to them, and if they believe in things like the rule of law, take that commitment and find another way to be part of the solution.
That's just some of what he says there. Smith first rose to prominence in 2022 when, because of his credentials, he's prosecuted war criminals, prominent people in the public corruption unit, another case that was tinged with political questions because he went after a then top Democrat, former Democratic running mate John Edwards. Based on that background, he brought that to this approach, and he oversaw those DOJ probes that resulted, as I mentioned, in the first federal indictment of a president. He dealt with the obstruction alleged, the hiding of classified documents, and, of course, then defendant Trump's recent history involved in January 6th.
Appointing Jack Smith to serve as special counsel.
Jack Smith, the special counsel appointed to investigate former President Donald Trump.
He's become the first former president ever to face federal charges.
Charges are related to Trump's mishandling of documents.
Charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States.
4 counts related to alleged actions he took to stay in power after the 2020 election.
Former President Trump is angry about Jack Smith. He believes that the Justice Department is aligned against him.
Federal officials launched this weekend an investigation into Jack Smith.
That is some of how we got there. During that period, as mentioned, Smith did not do interviews. Legally, he could, but he never did. Not with journalists or television, but not with lawyers or other settings. He was quiet and only spoke, if you will, or communicated through those filings. And after he left, and during what we've lived through this first term, this first year of the second term, we haven't heard from Smith much. So now there's plenty to discuss, both the case history, which there are legal ways he can discuss the parts that are not classified or secret, grand jury, and a president who is taking square aim at his perceived opponents through DOJ powers. The Judiciary Committee is now calling on Smith to go under oath with a line of attack, saying that now that he's essentially popped up, they still view this as a partisan and politically motivated history in those indictments. But he is sounding alarm bells, and we're going to play more from this newsworthy interview. I have some more of the excerpts, but anything you want to say now off top to help us understand what you learned?
Sure. You know, there's the substance of what he had to say, but I think that for people watching this, I would encourage them to sort of sit down and listen to the whole thing, because in many ways, what's more important than the substance is I think you get a sense of the man. and the person. He came across to me as extremely heartfelt and sincere. I think he's clearly been through a lot. But he mostly, when asked that sort of personal question, spoke about his team and what his team has been through. And so I really think one really useful thing for him speaking is for people to get to know him as opposed to the caricature of him. And that's why I hope he continues to speak out for that reason.
Really striking, because he, James Comey, others are facing these type of attacks that sometimes combine what looks like a break with rules and process to legally harass or even indict them. And then, as you mentioned, a kind of a public cartoonish attack that may affect how Americans understand what this was. Let's play another newsworthy part where you asked him to discuss, and he went into what he knows a lot about, how the DOJ works, what the rules require, and what that tells us about that new, unusual indictment of former FBI Director Comey.
This latest prosecution of the former director of the FBI. There's a process to secure an indictment. There's a process of predication, having some evidence before you do that. And again, I only know what I see myself in the media, but the career prosecutors, the apolitical prosecutors who analyzed this, said there wasn't a case. And so they brought somebody in who had never been a criminal prosecutor on days' notice to secure an indictment a day before the statute of limitations ended. That just reeks of lack of process. And I think a lot of Americans do not see this as a political issue. Process shouldn't be a political issue, right? Like, if there's rules in the department about how to bring a case, follow those rules. You can't say, I want this outcome, let me throw the rules out. That's why, frankly, you see all these conflicts between the career apolitical prosecutors I worked with, because they're being asked to do things that they think are wrong, and because they're not political people, they're not going to do them. And I think that explains why you've seen the resignations, you've seen people leave the department. It's not because they're enemies of one administration or the next. They've worked through decades for different administrations. It's just they've been doing things apolitically forever. And when they're told, no, you got to get this outcome no matter what, that is so contrary to how we were all raised as prosecutors. I think that's been the center of all the conflict.
He identifies the civic tradition there, and in the interview, he also mentioned that we have a comparison. If you go back far enough, we had what he refers to as the patronage system, where relationships and ultimately corruption trumped expertise. And he talks about why that's a problem in prosecutions or national security, why that hurts us.
Absolutely. That was sort of a running theme that he hit over and over again, that there is an apolitical process. And he really tried to not criticize the current administration, but rather to point out the obvious contrast between what is supposed to happen in an apolitical Department of Justice, regardless of party. And you can obviously then see what is happening now and contrast and compare those two. I thought that was quite striking. One of the things he did point out that I thought was some news was in pointing out that he followed all of those internal processes when he was special counsel, and the sort of tempest in a teapot du jour, which is the people on Congress complaining about whether Jack Smith was spying on them, was something that was not true, and that all of the processes that were necessary just to get sort of limited telephone records was disclosed in the report that he issued, a very, very lengthy report, but also was something that had to be approved all the way up the chain within the Department of Justice. This is something that there was a process that he followed. And so that was a real theme, that you just don't do things willy-nilly. You don't do things because you like someone or dislike somebody, that there's a process to follow. And that's what career people and professionals do.
Yeah, it's the rule of law. It's hung over this Trump era, and it's the difference between organized societies and ultimately oppression and bedlam. I mean, that's you can take it back hundreds of years, which is why sometimes this does feel weighty. We've, again, gone through. Here's another interesting part where he, upon your questioning, discusses the impact, the personal toll in these cases.
Yeah. What have the consequences been in terms of just the personal lives of either yourself or your team, in terms of how they have to live, whether they can find jobs? What is it like to have to live through that kind of harassment for what seemingly is just doing your job?
Everybody who worked on my team was fired, not just the lawyers, but the administrative staff as well. I think these are people who have spent their careers sacrificing for the communities they want to protect for our country. I'm, really upset that people like that not only are being vilified, but that it's hard to get their stories out of who they are. These are people, lawyers aside, these are people who put their lives on the line. And for them to be fired for stuff like this, I just don't see how anyone can hear those stories and not be moved by it.
Andrew?
So there was a moment where Jack Smith's voice actually cracked when he told the story about an FBI agent on his team who was fired. And people may recall that senior FBI leadership have said that they pleaded with Kash Patel to not fire him at this moment because his wife was dying of cancer at the time. And nevertheless, Kash Patel fired him.